Hello, and welcome to the first episode of a new podcast called 10 Kids, 2 Docs Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms.
You know, all of those topics that come up at your pediatrician visit that you never feel like you have enough time to discuss, those topics related to parenting. Well, this is a new podcast for parents in all stages of parenting, from infants to young adults. And Sylvia and I hope to draw on our experience as pediatricians and parents for the past 25 years to hopefully bring you 15 to 20-minute discussions on important topics in parenting. I am excited to see where this goes.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So, we're going to start by introducing ourselves so you know who we are. We are your hosts. My name is Sylvia Bank. I am a pediatrician and the lead parent to my 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls, and they are all about 2 years apart in age. I practice primary care pediatrics in the greater Washington, D.C., Maryland area. Personally, I am a second-generation Asian American and have been married to my high school sweetheart for 27 years.
And I'm Vivian Carlin. I'm a pediatrician, a wife, and a mother. I live with my family in South Texas. I have 6 children, ranging in ages from 20 to 11. I have 2 that are adopted. My children go girl, boy, all the way down. So that's kind of cool. I am a Christian, and I say that because in some of these episodes, you'll see how my faith informed my parenting.
When I was young, I wanted to have a lot of children. That was kind of a childhood dream of mine. Even before I met my husband and partner, that was something that I had always really wanted. And I think that also steered my interest in pediatrics. I love children, and why wouldn't I want to be a doctor of children as well?
Oh, yeah. I'm so much the same. I mean, I remember when my fellow medical students were really stressed about the match and which specialty of medicine they were going to apply in. And for me, I knew going into medical school, I'm going to go into pediatrics. In fact, if I wasn't going to get into medical school and pursue pediatrics, I was going to pursue teaching. I was going to work with children one way or the other. So that was almost like my first order priority. And then doing it through the practice of medicine was second order.
All right. So why don't we just briefly talk about how you and I met and how we became friends?
My memory of how we met, our origin story, Sylvia, is a night in the emergency room during our pediatric residency.
Yes.
And we did our pediatric residency at the same place. We were both at Hopkins, and that's a 3-year residency. And at this particular night, I was in my second year and you were in your first year.
Yes. So I was your intern.
Yes. You were my intern. So the 2 of us were randomly assigned to work a shift together, an overnight shift in the emergency room.
Right.
And I remember it was probably around like 2 a.m. and it was you and me. Things had surprisingly settled down.
So which sometimes never happens in the ER, right?
Right. Sometimes it's constant all night. But this particular night, there were no new patients to be seen. The only patients that were in the emergency room were waiting for beds on the floor, and they were being well taken care of. Everything was pretty settled. And we got to talking about the fact that you and I both played bridge.
Right. This random old person game that both you and I knew how to play. So I think based on that commonality, I think I had proposed that maybe we should try to play some bridge sometime. It's a common interest we had. And, maybe we should get together, maybe have dinner and play some bridge, right?
Yes. And then I brought Eric, who I was not married to at the time. We were just friends, but he had briefly learned how to play bridge because he had played before with my family. And you guys were like, ooh, who is that?
Right. And then it became a regular thing with us where, we were looking at our schedule, like your and my schedule being residents, which, we don't really have a lot of time off. We would find that weekend where both you were off and I was off at the same time, and then plan, maybe it was like every other month or so, we'd have dinner, we'd make dinner, and then we would play bridge.
Yes. So our friendship really evolved because of one random night that we were assigned together to work in the ER, and because we played bridge and we needed each other to continue to play bridge because there was no one else in our peer group who we could play bridge with.
And I had been married at that point to my husband for 6 years. And it was very difficult with the hours of residency training and medical school to start a family, in the midst of studying and working so hard. So we kind of decided that at the end of my residency was when we were going to start our family. So as you were finishing your residency, because you were a year ahead of me, that after you finished, my last year was the year that I became pregnant and we started building our family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And that was timed really well, by the way, Sylvia.
And I think at that time, as we are, getting together and playing bridge with you and Eric, like Joe and I definitely were introduced to Eric as your friend.
Hmm.
And over the course of our getting together and playing bridge,
You saw the whole evolution, yes, from friend to wedding. Yeah, so Eric and I got married a month after I completed my residency. So I do appreciate that I was able to go through all of medical school and residency single and unattached because it's such a self-focused time in life. And as you alluded to, there's no time for anything else. And then we caught up to you pretty quickly in having children. And then we just kept having children.
right. I feel like either you or I were pregnant for an extended period of time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Almost alternating. In fact, I had the statistic on that. Between us, we were pregnant for 72 months and we were not pregnant at the same time. It was always you had a child, I was
And then
pregnant.
9 months later, you had a child.
Yes.
And so that's how it went. Like I had my first child and he was a boy. And then 9 months later, you had your first child and she was a girl. And we pretty much just went back and forth for several years.
Even with gender, we
Yeah,
always went back and forth, which worked out really well when we would get together because we always had a very even split of girls and boys.
right. And plenty of kids to play with. So at that time, um, you and Eric were living in the Northern Virginia area, and we were still kind of in the Maryland area, but close enough to still get together.
Yes, yes. And then, as you know, Eric and I moved to South Texas fairly early on in our marriage, and we've been here now for about 15 years. So much different than living outside of DC.
But I think we have definitely, looking back at these years, done a very good job of continuing our friendship and keeping in touch.
Okay, so Sylvia, this podcast was your idea. So can you just take me through your vision for this podcast and what caused you to think of this?
Sure. As a practicing primary care pediatrician, a lot of the listeners are parents and they know what the office visit is like. You have your complaint, you come in, you get advice, a prescription, or you go in for your well visit, talk about eating, sleeping. This is what I do every day. And I find more and more there isn't enough time to really delve into and offer advice and help guide parents and patients with some of the most, I think, useful bits of parenting. And I was hoping that in order to reach the most people with some practical advice, the podcast would be a great way of spreading that knowledge, helping parents navigate the difficulties of parenting in different stages.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, Sylvia. I mean, when we're in the office, our time is very limited and we have to take thorough time to address medication management, vaccines, development, all of these things. We often don't have time for all of the parenting questions that we get asked and all of the advice that we would like to give. And as you and I both know, sometimes those practical parenting pieces of advice are so important to a child's health and well-being that they almost deserve more attention than some of the other things that we have to spend time on.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also an area where we can really help and support parents. Like I see myself as a doctor for children, of course, but I also see myself as a support for parents and to help them navigate parenting. And these practical pearls are usually the ones that get left out if there's a time restriction on the visit. And I feel like this podcast is hopefully going to fill in those gaps and help support parents through some of the difficult parts of parenting.
Yeah, and as you know, Sylvia, you initially approached me with this idea, and I initially said, no way, I don't have time to do that. And then it just kept coming to my mind night after night for months. And I called you back and was like, okay, pitch it to me, cast vision for me. And had I ever had any doubt around that time frame, as you know, the Surgeon General released an advisory called Parents Under Pressure, and it was addressing the mental health and well-being of parents. So let's just take some time to look a little closer at the Surgeon General's advisory and then cast vision for how we might be able to meet the need for some of the things he advises.
When he made this call, as doctors in America, the Surgeon General is our guiding legislator. And in trying to think about how we can answer his call,
Mhm.
the whole idea about this podcast and supporting parents really seemed to kind of fit with what I am practically seeing in the office.
Yes, I fully agree. I mean, parents are stressed. And I have to remember, you and I went into parenting with the most knowledge we could have. We had already both completed our residency training in pediatrics. We had been trained by some of the best people in the field, and parenting was still stressful.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I feel like the Surgeon General's advisory, in my opinion, was to try to increase this awareness
Mhm.
and identify potential issues that may have gone unrecognized before.
So I want to take just a few minutes to look at the Surgeon General's advisory, and we'll include the link to the advisory in the show notes. But on page 15, there's a nice summary, and it's entitled Examples of Parental Stressors That Can Impact Mental Health and Well-Being. These are a
Mhm.
lot of the issues that we had already come up with and identified as stressors that we see amongst our patients and parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the first one is financial strain, economic instability, and poverty.
So the summary says financial worries continue to be the top stressor.
Mhm.
So, oftentimes, what I see in my primary care practice, children are sick and the parents come in and they are at a loss. Their children are sick, so they can't go to daycare. The parents can't go to work. It's not just one day, it's been days, if not an entire week,
Mm,
where the parents feel like they're still paying for daycare, but
yep.
the children are sick and cannot go, and then the parents can't go to work. And this is like the culmination of that type of financial stress because they can't actually do their jobs and go to work.
Yeah, super stressful. The next one is time demands. So the increase in time spent both on work commitments and with family responsibilities.
Right. So I feel like I personally experienced this type of time demands crunch when it came to my career and being a parent, where I felt like I was always late trying to get to work,
Mm,
because it was hard to get everything done for the kids out the door before getting to work. And then after work, I was always running late getting home.
mhm.
Kids are waiting at home or waiting for pickup, and I am just crunched and trying to get out of work to get home. And I think I often felt at periods of time in parenting in my career where I wasn't doing a good job parenting because of the time demands, and I wasn't doing a good
Mhm.
job at work. Like there just wasn't enough time to have that feeling like I'm doing a good job at either one of my jobs, right?
Right, right.
Okay, the next one is children's health. It includes mental health challenges, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and acute or chronic illness.
This is such a huge one. And I know
Mhm.
we are going to explore this in episodes to come. I have experience with children that are receiving special education at school, and my experiences with getting them diagnosed and getting the services and making sure that we're doing everything we can for them. And that's very stressful. And I know you have your own experience as well.
Oh, yes. I have a child with a chronic illness that involves a lot of time management, even when the illness is going well, just making time for the specialist's appointment and taking them out of school and getting them to their appointment and getting back. It's just the logistics of finding their medication and meeting their medical needs, even when things are going well, let alone when things aren't going well with their illnesses, and it adds a layer of worry for parents, like
Absolutely.
stress and worry of their outcome, and are we as parents doing everything to advocate and help our children when they're not doing well with their health?
Right. The next one, children's safety. I mean, gosh, The fact that you and I grew up not even knowing what an active shooter drill was,
Right.
now that that's such common vocabulary for them.
Sure. I was just the other day talking to my high schoolers about our family plan if there was an active shooter in their school. I can't even imagine that that's the world that we live in
Right,
today.
right, right. We've had 2 incidents at different schools with my kids where they had a lockdown where there was, an armed person in the vicinity of the school. The amount of fear and anxiety that created and having to talk through that with our children, very,
Absolutely.
very stressful.
And one of the big ones is being bullied at school. If they feel unsafe because of another student
Yeah,
threatening their space, that can be extremely stressful for parents to counsel their children, to work with the school, to try to find a good solution that works for everyone and helps their child.
and we have to remember choking, drowning, motor vehicle accidents. I mean, there's a whole list of things that concern parents regarding their child's safety, and those things haven't gone away. Sometimes they're put on the back burner because we're talking about violence and social media and bullying, but those things are still there too. We've just added on the stressors that are on parents now.
Next one is parental isolation and loneliness. Parents struggle with loneliness at higher rates than non parents do, and that adds to the stress.
I love what you said in our trailer, Sylvia, that even though with your children, you're almost never alone. I mean, if you're in the bathroom and you have a toddler, they're going to be coming knocking on the door or trying to open it to come in there with you. You are always surrounded by them, but yet it can be a very isolating and lonely time for adults.
Yeah, sometimes with parents, it's that lack of contact with another adult,
Mhm.
talking with another adult and having an adult conversation. And if it's been a while since that has happened, that can feel very isolating and lonely.
Yeah. Okay, this next one, I
Mm,
mean, this is the elephant in the room, right? We could
yeah.
spend 3 years talking about different aspects of this every week, and that's technology and social media. The
Hmm.
rapid adoption and evolution of technology and social media have been difficult and stressful for parents to manage. And a couple things I think about that make this exceptionally stressful are that we make plans and then it changes. It is so rapidly evolving that whatever we decide now works is going to change in the future. And also, there's always been this cultural aspect of parenting where the parent gets advice from the grandparent or the great grandparent. And
Right.
this is one where we are flying blind. None of
Right.
us grew up in this. The grandparents didn't grow up even thinking about this. So we are, as we go, trying to figure out what's best for children in this new era of ubiquitous technology.
Yeah, and it's a problem not only for parents, but for pediatricians and the American Academy of
Yeah.
Pediatrics. They are having to put out recommendations moment to moment, year to year as they
Mhm.
discover new stresses or problems that social media and technology can instill in children. The last one is cultural pressures and children's futures. Cultural expectations vary, from different backgrounds, what they expect out of their children's achievements, what societal norms are for achievement, and the pressure to meet these perceived parenting standards for their children's future. Especially later in life, in the middle school and definitely high school ages, is a huge pressure on parents.
So as you go through the Surgeon General's advisory on page 22, they do list some ways that we can help parents. I think Sylvia, where you and I can really fit in and really where you had vision for this a year ago when you started talking about it are points 3 and 4. So point 3 is we need to talk openly about the stress and struggles that come with parenting. And fourthly, we must foster a culture of connection among parents to combat loneliness and isolation.
I mean, these two action items could even define what I see this podcast and the role of this podcast for our listeners. Talking openly about stress and struggles. I mean, this is what I intend to do with you, Vivian, every week as we tackle a new subject, talk about our personal stresses as parents or what we have seen in our practice, and just have a discussion about how that is stressful. I think that can help parents and caregivers relieve some of that stress.
I agree. When you and I had our first brainstorming session on this podcast, we
Mhm.
sat down and created a list of topics. And within about 30 minutes, we had 146. And that was before I had seen the Surgeon General's advisory.
Yeah,
It was right before it had come out. And when we went through the 7 parental stressors that are highlighted in the advisory, and we could take our 146 topics and just plug them into those. I mean,
right.
we knew it's clear to us in our practice that these are stressors and these are issues we need to be discussing.
Right. And then hopefully, as we connect and encourage our listeners to connect with each other, we're hoping that that's going to achieve this fourth point where we combat the loneliness and isolation. That when you're going through an issue with parenting or with your children, that you are not the only one. You are
Mm,
not alone in this. And there are a lot of parents out there that have a similar experience. And hopefully, the podcast will combat that sense of you being the only one with this problem.
absolutely. And I'll say, Sylvia, you and I have made very different choices in our parenting. And I really hope that that will be of value to our listeners too. That a lot of these things, there's not a right or wrong way.
For sure. And just because you and I have some differences in the way that we've decided make decisions for our children or differences in our children as individuals, it doesn't mean that we can't support each other through our parenting journey.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Simply put, caregivers need care too. And I think that is what the whole advisory is about, right?
Yep. Hopefully we can help contribute to that. Okay. Well, I'm excited.
I am too. This is where I say, this is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Vivian Carlin.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.